We typically get started at about 5 after the hour, so we'll let
Okay.
people trickle in and then we'll jump right into our conversation. We do have a
Okay.
couple of housekeeping notes, and then we'll just have the free-flowing conversation that we're known for at the Energy Forum. And if we have technical difficulties because of internet or computers or whatever it might be, so be it. We can deal with them. Um, I'll start by saying that we do have a in-person event on May 27th. That is going to be at Medtronic's Junco site. And we are going to be talking about industrial microgrids, particularly how do we make them easier to develop? How do we make that type of success story more replicable? And ultimately, how do we make sure that on-site energy resources are more available to more users? Medtronic has 4 or 5 sites across the island. 90% of their global production comes through their Puerto Rico sites, and are one of the largest employers in Puerto Rico, and represent the most important sector, which is industrial manufacturing. And so it's not just about highlighting the fact that Medtronic trusts Puerto Rico because they trust the energy solutions that they have access to, but it's about making sure that we understand what are the barriers that one of the largest companies in the world faced in accessing something that ultimately should be relatively boring for somebody whose core business is making things like pacemakers and other medical devices. They don't want to think about energy. They have to think about energy. And that is one of the lessons that all businesses in Puerto Rico have to take from. So that's May 27th in person at their Junco site. We're going to hear an update from our microgrid development work group about the progress that's been made in the last quarter. We're also going to be taking a tour of their facility and learning specifically about their cogeneration facility and some of the obstacles they overcame to make that project a success. So, Eidalia, we'd love to see you guys there, and everyone else who can hear my voice. We'll make sure that the link is already in the chat, but we'll make sure it's in the show notes when we publish this episode as well, and you'll see it in your inboxes. That's going to be our first of many in-person events moving forward this year. We'll also have a site visit at a utility scale solar farm to understand the challenges that large solar developers are facing and how their solution is going to fit into the broader energy generation matrix moving forward. Those details are yet to be confirmed, but stay tuned. That's going to be at some point later this summer. And then we'll have our annual National Clean Energy Week event in September. We had it last year at Vivo Beach Club. We're going to have it again this year at Vivo Beach Club. And those dates are September 15th and 16th. We're working on 2 great days of panels where we're going to be talking about finance, infrastructure, military energy resiliency, regulatory and policy changes. We're going to hear an update from our friends in Washington, D.C. about their reflections on 250 days of Trump administration 2.0, and what that means for the energy sector writ large, but also specifically how that impacts the energy sector here on the island. Um, so a lot going on, and then we'll have a networking event closer to November to celebrate Thanksgiving and sort of the end of the year with the Energy Forum. So stay tuned. We've got a calendar of in-person events to accompany our 3 conversations a month that we have through the Energy Forum. And my clock now reads 6 after, so I will introduce myself. I'm Sam Tallman. I'm Director of Energy Services at Green Power Technologies and co-principal here at the Energy Forum. I'm joined, as always, by my conversation partner, Tom King, who's in San Francisco today.
Yeah, I thought everybody should know that if I fall asleep, it's because it's really early.
Yeah.
And
I've got my cup of green tea here though.
there you go.
Good.
And
Good.
good morning, Tom. And we're joined by our guest today for the General Forum meeting, Eidalia Gonzalez. Eidalia, good to have
Hi,
you with us.
everyone. Thank you. Thank you guys for inviting me.
So you are very tuned into what's happening with regards to the legal side. Obviously, you're a lawyer that works with Ferioli, and you guys work specifically on a whole variety of energy projects, and we can get into that. But you really have your finger on the pulse with regards to what's happening on the policy, regulatory side, and how to get projects across the finish line, which something that Tom and I have harked on a lot, that there's a lot of good ideas. There's no shortage of good ideas with regards to how do we address some of the challenges that we're facing in the energy sector on the island. One of the things that we're seeing is that every one of those good ideas has to go through a gauntlet where they can die for any variety of reasons. And I'm sure you've seen your fair share of projects that are perfectly valid in concept die for reasons that are maybe not unique to Puerto Rico, and many others that maybe are unique to Puerto Rico. I want to get into some of those, but first, I just sort of a general personal question: what inspired the change from geology to law?
That's a good question. Well, the first thing that I wanted to be was a marine biologist. So there you go. But I wanted to go to the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez. All my family has went there, and I just wanted to continue that tradition. So I started in geology with the thought that I was going to continue a master's in marine biology. But then I loved geology. So I got the opportunity to work with the U.S. Forest Service in Texas for a year, and then moved with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Savannah, Georgia for 3 years. I worked with geotechnology, more technical aspects of geology. But then I wanted to come back, and I wanted to come back to Puerto Rico. I loved law. I had always wanted to go to law school, so I applied. I got in. I did my 3 years. My plan was to focus on environmental law, but then I started seeing that I was more interested in energy law. So that's what I've been trying to focus on and grow in this past 11 years in my legal practice. I also my husband is an electrical engineer, so we have this constant conversations on what's going on in Puerto Rico, especially in the power sector. So that's why I kind of moved and transitioned to that. I always have geology in my heart, but law, and specifically in the energy sector, has been my new passion.
Great.
So,
Excellent.
and frankly, one of the things that we've seen is that there's a whole variety of lawyers that don't have the technical background to be engaging in some of the energy conversations. So we have plenty of lawyers that are engineers, but it's also important to have multidisciplinary thought leadership in this space. The governor recently issued an executive order to overhaul the regulatory state in Puerto Rico, a couple of them, in fact. And this coincides with orders to accelerate permitting on all things energy. And I'm just going to quote from your colleague, Eugene, on one of his posts: a total exemption from permitting, consultations, authorizations, and endorsements for critical repairs, reconstruction, and equipment replacement projects by entities including PREPA, LUMA, Genera, AES, and Ecoelectrica.
Mm-hmm.
What what does this mean in terms of actual access to progress for the very large scopes of work that each of these entities are dealing with? And what does that mean for the people who depend on their services?
Yeah, this is a crucial aspect that we had, the governor had anticipated when she was running for office, and it's always been a topic of conversation. Specifically, permitting has always been one of those hurdles that just obstacles that really tries and delays projects from being completed and getting to operation. So I think it's very important, and what we've perceived from the government entities that are working on this, that are the ones that are going to implement this, what they have said is this is crucial for projects to get through the finish line. And so basically what we're hearing is we want to get these projects, the permitting as fast as we can. This is going to be a little different from what we're used to in with regards to specifically environmental aspects. Environmental permits are basically one of the ones that always delays. And the delays because there has to be a study performed. Puerto Rico is a very small island. We have water, we have wetlands. It depends on the location of the project. If it's close to the coast, if it's in the mountains. So it's the environmental permit is always one of those permits that really takes time. But with this new executive order, the purpose of it is to try and streamline those processes so that these move faster. What we have heard the government say is that they have already done this. They have moved representatives from different agencies that provide endorsements, mentioning the Department of Natural Resources, the Planning Board, these land use environmental agencies. So they're now part of the OCPE, the Office of Permitting Management, and they're going to be there to provide that streamlining, those recommendations that are required to move forward towards the construction permit, which is what everybody wants to get to so that construction can begin. So that's what we've been discussing and with our clients, and also what we've been hearing from conversations that we have with the PREB, for example. And not to say that this has not been done before. Puerto Rico has had executive orders issuing an accelerated permitting process for energy projects specifically in the past. But I think with what's going on stateside in the mainland, with the push for energy projects to be a priority, specifically the ones that are related to oil, natural gas, and not environmental permits not being an obstacle, or at least not being something that takes long. We think that there's some type of information that they're getting from stateside that they want to implement here as well. So trying just to streamline all these projects.
Yeah, and I think that reminds me a little bit of, well, one, I think it's a recognition, whether its impact is as anticipated, it is a vocal recognition that Puerto Rico's in an energy crisis, and it's not merely enough to declare an emergency status to potentially uh, say in name alone that you're going to accelerate things. Right there, there actually has to be process improvement for the work that needs to be done, so it doesn't actually end up getting bottlenecked. There's no shortage of work that needs to get done, right? And if it's saying we're going to create a czar that's going to be the final approval on a variety of things, what you do is you risk having another bottleneck, and so what this does is potentially avoid that. It does remind me of an axiom in sort of conservative political thought called Chesterton's fence, where a conservative and a liberal, and I'm paraphrasing and simplifying, but are walking through the woods, and they come across a fence, and the liberal says, "Let's knock it down," and the conservative says, "Wait, maybe it's here for a reason." And so to what extent are we knocking down fences that might have unintended consequences later down the road for knocking them down, or are we getting much more streamlined regulatory processes, or is it a balance and we're going to have to move quick and break things and rebuild the things that are really most important?
Yeah, and I have that same concern, but for at least in paper, in the executive order, you still have to comply with applicable laws and regulations. None of that has been amended with regards to allowing some certain, maybe for the exclusive categories, that there's some, for environmental permits, there's some actions or projects that could be excluded and not have to go through the whole environmental process. But since we're talking about large, utility scale projects, that's likely not going to be included in that type
Right.
of exclusion. However, we have seen that in the past, like I mentioned, that this has already been implemented. Let's streamline, let's make the permitting process much more quicker for these types of projects. And we still find we haven't really found that perfect spot that really just balance, that makes it much more easier to get these projects to the finish line. It's always a hurdle. But I think if the intent, I think the problem has always been the intention in executing these executive orders, because they put it in paper, it looks fabulous, everybody's excited, let's get it done, but then there's not, the execution is what's lacking. So if there is a clear definition of a leader or somebody that says, look, this is how it's going to go, then I think it's going to be a benefit for all these projects without undermining the legal requirements for environmental protection here in Puerto Rico, because we can't just think about the short term, as you mentioned. We also have to think long term. And I know that the focus of the government right now is let's get everything, try to focus on short term because there's an emergency, the summer's coming up, there's a lot of talk that the summer's going to be a very hard time for the energy sector, specifically for the legacy assets now managed by Genera and all this. So I know the government is focused on that short term, but there also has to be, I think, a harmony between what they're thinking of short term and long term. And I think that brings a very important aspect that we've been trying, and all the groups that I've been participating in, is collaboration between the government agencies and a clear path. Because you see, for with the IRP, for example, I don't know if we're going to touch on that later on,
Yeah.
but you see that Luma is taking, it's the one that has to go and take command on that aspect of creating the IRP and getting it to the approval with the PREB. But there's also other stakeholders that have to provide input, like Genera. And when we discuss these different aspects, be it microgrids or what's going to happen in the short term to prepare for the summer, or what's going to happen with the 3,000 megawatt RFP, all of this, we don't see, like, there's kind of a disconnect between some agencies on who is the one that has to take the reins and just say, look, this is what we're going to do. 1, 2, 3. This is our priorities. Let's get this done. So I don't know if the SAR is supposed to be that figure. So we'll see. And I tie it into the permitting, because that's the position is we need to have one person that's going to say, these are the projects. This is 1, 2, 3 projects that we need to focus on and get them done with the permitting. And in the recent government caucus from the PRMA, the Puerto Rico Manufacturing Association, the director of the Department of Economic Development, which the OCPE office is under them, he mentioned that they do have a list of energy projects that are categorized either as strategic projects or critical projects that they're giving priority with regards to permitting. However, the list is not published anywhere. You would have to request it from them so that they can let you know where your project is in that list. So that's something that I think they know that they have to work on, because that was discussed in that caucus, but permitting is a very big issue.
So we're gonna get into the IRP here in a second, but before we jump off this topic of that executive order and the permitting streamline, what projects, without knowing the specific projects, what's the profile of project that you anticipate that most to positively impact?
LNG oil projects.
Yeah.
Those are the ones, because as we all know, and HISA is already one of the projects that's it's the only one mentioned in the IRP that's a new utility scale for LNG, right? And the RFP for the 3,000 megawatt is for everything, not only exclusively renewable energy. So what we're anticipating is, and not only me, I mean, this is what has been discussed, even the PREB mentioned it. What they are anticipating is trying to replace all these legacy assets that Genera has, replace them with units that are oil or natural gas, so that could be replaced and those old units are retired, and we replace them with newer, more flexible technology, but it's still LNG.
Yeah, and one of the projects that I hope, I mean, we'll get. I said that was my last question. I lied. We're gonna I have one more before we get into the IRP, which is the role of, large BESS projects in grid stabilization. And from what I understand about the project that Genera is managing with Tesla and federal funds, those 430 megawatts of BESS across 6 sites are very much caught up in regulatory permitting. I mean, it's a nightmare in some of these cases where um, you would think that is exactly where this type of executive order would target to say, this is for grid stabilization. And there's no reason to push it any longer than needs to. It's on PREPA land. We can demolish and decommission Vega Baja and other sites as quickly as possible. We can have, staggered projects so that the batteries ultimately get installed and operating, not by the end of 2026, but like, well, again, you mentioned that this summer is going to be tough, not just for the energy sector, but everybody who relies on energy. Um, uh, how do we address some of these challenges today that we can actually attack with this executive order for permitting and regulation?
Yeah, I agree 100%. Best should be priority number one. And at least Genera, that's what they are mentioning at every conversation. We got best. We're gonna put best. We need best because that's best is a beautiful name, by the way. So they're
Bessie.
yeah, they're focusing on that because that's the quickest way they can get to stabilize the grid
Yeah.
and avoid what we all know happens after 2 3 p.m. when all these big 1,000 megawatt with renewables, including the rooftops, they go away. So that's why Genera is focusing a lot on that. Obviously, they have what they're saying is, look, our generation assets are old. They can't withstand this up and down that's going on. We need those batteries to help us stabilize, and that's their narrative. And the PREB also has mentioned this again, and they are saying that BESS is important as well. So I think everybody knows that this is a priority. I don't know why the government is delaying on this. This should have been, I think this was announced last year, right? Or at the beginning of the year. I don't know. But they should have moved quicker on this. And this executive order, the purpose of it is aligned with the BESS as well.
Yeah, and I think that people are saying, yeah, it's great. You guys have, and he says a great project. We need more of that. We need more power plants that for addressing generation deficiencies. Um, and I hope you're successful. And we're going to get into this dichotomy here in a second, but you're going to be successful if you're successful in 2028.
Yeah.
And that is multiple hurricane seasons before I, as Juan Pueblo, feels the success that is being promoted. And not to say it's not real, but it's not immediate. And that ultimately is still a core challenge for the people who live on the island, who operate on the island, who are the Medtronics of the world, who require energy on the island. So
Yeah.
let's change focus to the IRP. Because the integrated resource plan is something that has been an initiative, a goal for the island for almost the past decade to
Yeah.
understand in bite-sized chunks how the energy sector is going to move forward. And just before we start, I'll put in chat that on May 13th at 1 p.m. is the next stakeholder meeting. If you're interested in following the IRP process, setpr.com is where you get all their information. They have made this very accessible to folks that want to follow along with how the IRP process is going. So I just put in chat the fourth round of stakeholder meetings on the IRP, and if you're interested in following closely this process, May 13th, 1 p.m. Puerto Rico time. So, Eidalia, the IRP, as far as I see it, and Tom, jump in here because you and I have had
Well,
disagreements.
no, I was just going to say, to that. I mean, I was on the first one they had in January, and I think I was the only one asking questions. So I mean, all right, I'm more wonky probably than others, and spot little areas to ask questions, etc. But ask questions, right? I mean, if it's not clear, just ask questions. Ask leading questions.
Mhm.
Don't make life easy on them.
Yeah, yeah. We were in the one that they were discussing the four scenarios that they presented in the first interim
Right.
IRP that they filed.
Yeah.
And at least in that one, there were a lot of engineers there, so they asked very poignant questions regarding more technical aspects of it. But it was interesting, and it's a good way to participate, and even and good ideas came out of it. You know, Luma was like, oh yeah, we should add that, or we should add this, and so it's good to have that conversation.
Yeah.
So we're in the midst of we're gonna get into PREPA bankruptcy here in a second as well. So PREPA is still in bankruptcy. There's been a shift away from the six tranche renewable energy procurement process. We have federal funds that are at best confusing and chaotic, and at worst non-existent. We have new executive orders. We've got an energy czar that's very much prioritizing on behalf of Governor Gonzalez this 3,000 megawatt procurement of baseload power that truly overhauls the six tranche process of having rolling admission. So amongst all that, what role does the IRP have? And my initial sense is it's an academic process. Why is that wrong? And what is the hope for this process?
Okay. So basically, after I think the most impact on this process that started obviously has been going on for a while. In January, from January till now, a lot has happened. There have been laws that have been enacted. There have been executive orders, a change in policy with regards to renewable energy. Not a complete change, but a kind of shift in the focus. So the RFP right now, and even in the motions that have been filed by Luma, I'm sorry, they say, look, this is what we have based on what was the existing framework that we had to work with for the modeling of these scenarios. They even say in one of their Luma will assess the impact of energy public policy changes of the recently enacted Act 1, which is the one that basically removed all interim goals for renewable energy and also delayed the retirement of IAS's coal plant or any coal plant, because everybody says, oh, the legislation amended IAS. No, IAS, it doesn't say IAS, it's just coal generation using coal. So
And important to note that IASA has not, that contract has not officially been extended yet.
no.
They're in
No.
a negotiation phase, and IASA has made it very clear that they're not interested, and have made that clear for years that we have a deadline. You guys told us we had a deadline. We agreed to it, and we're out. So we'll see what ultimately happens. But excellent point.
Yeah, and determined to, and then they say, and determined together with the Energy Bureau whether its implementation will shift the direction of the 2025 IRP, including whether the current assumptions and inputs must be modified. they later go on, Luma, and tells the PREB, like, we will not be able to meet the May 16 deadline for filing the final IRP if we have to change
Right.
and use these other these regulatory or policy changes. So this is clear. Luma has already told that to the PREB, and that was said when they filed the second interim report. So we're close. Luma is continuing the process. We have Genera recently filed a motion, and I think April 14 was the last movement in this case with the PREB. So there seems, nobody's saying that the process is stalled, but what I'm thinking is going to happen is they're going to continue on with whatever Luma has right now. And probably later on, it will be amended to include this, or the PREB, and I don't know if that's going to happen, they're going to have to issue a resolution extending the time frame, and so that Luma can take into account all of these changes, including because for the IRP, since you really don't have a project in mind, they take into consideration whatever has been signed. So any PPOAs that have been signed to this date, that's taken into consideration for the modeling. They can't really anticipate, oh, we're going to have 3,000 megawatts of new generation, because that process is ongoing, and I think to this date it hasn't even been published yet, the RFP from the P3.
Yeah.
So the Luma can only do as much as it can. I think for example, they, in their interim report, they chose one of their portfolios. The portfolio that they chose is a portfolio that includes the construction of the new LNG unit, which we all know is the Energisa, and a new biodiesel unit. Moreover, existing LNG units are converted to biodiesel. They focus a lot on biodiesel, by the way. I don't know if anybody has read or seen the scenarios, but biodiesel is a big
Yeah.
component of the IRP.
A very
And
large fig leaf.
yeah, and they say furthermore, no additional utility scale, solar PV or BESS resources are added beyond the fixed decision projects included in the tranche 1 and 2, as well as the
Right.
Genera and Accelerate and the ASAP, Luma's ASAP program.
Yeah.
So this is what they're taking into consideration. The only aspect that I think would change, obviously, is that ISA would continue. And Sam, I think the government is just going to give ISA what they're asking for. So because they don't have any other choice right now. Because the BESS has taken forever, and ISA is a big component of the generation. So that's
Yeah, well,
probably
and they're in a position to name their price, right? Because um there are two options available, which is you pay us what we're telling you to pay us, or you can find an alternative right away for 500 megawatts of cheap baseload power, and there is no option B for the government to go pursue an alternative, and that's sort of the same thing with regards to Luma in analogous to the Luma situation, which is, I think, part of the tension between PREPA and Luma is that there are not a lot of Luma alternatives lined up at the door to take over the transmission and distribution operations, and PREPA knows that. And if Luma fails in their mission, PREPA is the best alternative, and of course that creates an ego clash as opposed to collaboration, particularly in the permit, particularly in the easing of some of the major permanent works that Luma has to get done and needs PREPA to be on board with. So,
yeah.
Braulio put in the chat that it always seems like there's a source of uncertainty in the energy sector with no set path forward, and I think that's absolutely right. That
Yeah.
we have and maybe that's true for the broader economy, which is we can have a 2 to 3 year plan and then spend the next 2 to 3 years developing the next 2 to 3 year plan, and then have a 2 to 3 year right, and we know where this
Yeah.
ends, which is not sustainable long-term trajectories to say this is where we're going. Who knows if Governor Gonzalez is going to win a re-election in 3 years and 2 months, whatever
Mhm.
it is. Uh,
Yeah.
and all of this will be, no, we're going to slap on a bunch of new regulations. We're going to change it back to utility scale solar. We're going to have basically paused
Yeah.
progress or whatever. It's not going to be long term.
Yeah.
Yeah. And mhm.
Oh, I was and PrEP will still be in bankruptcy. Yeah, I mean, look, this IRP has not been made easier by Act One.
Mhm.
Act One was a mark of surprising pragmatism from the government of Puerto Rico, and
Mhm.
so we'll see how that works out. But I don't think the energy industry is a blindfolded kid. I mean, I like the analogy, but I think it's more like trying to thread a needle, while simultaneously trying to stand up straight in a hurricane and an earthquake. Right? I mean, this is there's plenty of blame to go around for how we got here, but not so much for what people are trying to do now. So
Yeah, and I think that brings me back to what I said earlier on, there has to be for me, the Energy Star position has to be the point, the decision-making position that's going to tell PREPA what the direction is going to be, and then PREPA tells his contractees, look, this is what we're going to do. This is 1, 2, 3. We got to do it this way, because that and everybody has to talk, and everybody has to go through in the same boat, in the same direction, um, because that's what we've been seeing. There's been kind of a, we're there but we're not there, we meet but we don't meet. Well, even like I mentioned, in the for the IRP, going back to the IRP, the latest motion is Genera saying that Luma hasn't invited them to participate. And then Luma files a motion saying, yeah, we have invited you. We met this date, we met this date, you provided this information. So, that's the kind of thing that you don't want to see. You want to see a united front, in this regard. And I understand the whole perception from the public and the governor trying to to make it, for her optics, that to the public, that, oh, I'm doing something about what's going on, by firing Luma or whatever. But as you said, if it's not Luma, it's going to be another name. And I don't know how that's going to be possible, just because any private company that sees what's going on now, and that sees that a government is telling its predecessor, oh, look, we're going to take the contract away from you. You're not doing this, or you're not complying with this, or whatever. It doesn't state a good precedent, in my opinion.
have you looked at the temporary contract with Luma?
The Luma
Yeah.
contract.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because they're not on their contract, right? They're on the temporary contract. It
Yeah,
doesn't
they're
actually,
still exactly.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
because
there's
Prepa is still in bankruptcy.
the other, the other contract hasn't started. So I mean, you could rescind that contract. I mean, you pay the fine, do whatever. It's kind of like no fault. But I don't think there's anything you can point to in the temporary contract that says that they're violating anything. I mean, it was basically, please, 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 God, come in and help us. And I mean, if you want to read between the lines,
Yeah.
and we'll make sure you get some money, but please get this stuff started, and we hope bankruptcy will be settled soon and you can take over, and then you're going to have to meet the terms of the contract.
Yeah,
So
and if somebody wants to read a little bit on that, the Puerto Rico, the lawyers, college, they published a document where they analyzed the agreement, and they pointed out some sections that they understand have been in non-compliant, that Luma has been non-compliant with. Um, they have a summary in the beginning because the document is very thick. But for it, as being a lawyer, it's going to be very hard if we go to litigation on this. It's going to be very hard to prove what they're saying that could be one of the arguments
Right.
So
to declare the non-compliance. So
so that's such an important point. I think it's the perfect segue into PREPA bankruptcy, because what that would ultimately do, and you mentioned this a moment ago, Eidalia, that what it would signal to other private investors that would potentially come in and participate in the energy sector is, we're going to make your life hell. And the energy excuse me the costs associated with PREPA's bankruptcy, and we've said this ad nauseum here on the Energy Forum, is the cost of that bankruptcy is potentially far higher than the cost of a bad deal. And so the cost of entering litigation and trying to prove Luma's wrongdoing is going to be, the cost of that is going to be far higher than the benefits. And so by no means is that to say that Luma is perfect, but it is hard to find less imperfect or more imperfect operators to come in and do that job. And that's really where we're stuck at, is like, if we want to make progress, litigation does the opposite
yeah,
and sticks our feet in the mud and say, nope, we're going to pick this battle, as opposed to trying to make the solution work. That, look, I'm in favor of better procurement processes. I'm in better of making sure that it's why slowly, albeit assuredly, we are going to be publishing the article series called Shoot Aim Ready, because we have done a bunch of things out of order, right? If we don't have if we don't have an off taker or contracting entity that's not bankrupt, we how are we going to attract the most competitive bidders to come in and participate in this process? And so
yeah,
it's not that we don't want a private entity to come in and operate the T&D system. It's that we have one now,
Right. If
and
we
we
don't
have
have,
to deal with that because we
yeah,
chose them. With it,
yeah,
nobody forced them upon us.
no,
Beyond the fact that we put out the RFP,
right.
they're the only ones that responded, and we chose them.
I mean, I'll say something else, right? This process would have failed even if Puerto Rico, PREPA wasn't in bankruptcy, because it was so poorly thought out, so poorly put together, no planning, no process. You were just talking about permitting and how, in effect, there's no permitting regime, right? There's no experience. People have an idea, they can see what people have done in other markets, and it doesn't necessarily translate. And nobody has experience in actually setting it up and doing it. So they're relying on the interest of the private entities to want to put the things in place to move this forward. And you can do that to some extent, provided you're ready to move forward with them. Where do you draw the line? Where do you accept, what the company is proposing? So you've got interminable negotiations, nothing gets anywhere, the permits don't get issued. Same thing with contracts, right? No standard form contracts. PREPA did not put out any form of, this is the type, this is what the PPA is going to look like, and these are the terms that we want to give you. Here's how you can structure your payments. Here's what we're going to do to reduce payment and enforcement risk. None of that was done, and yet they expected the world to magically appear and throw solar plants up in Puerto Rico. So this was not well done.
Hey, Dahlia, I
yeah,
want to give you an opportunity to respond to that, but let me ask you a quick question as we transition to the PREPA bankruptcy
Yeah.
conversation, because it's all related, and get your impression on something. So, bondholders this past week are claiming that there are more net revenues in PREPA's books than PREPA may have been letting on. Of course, PREPA is and folks who believe those bondholders to be predatory are basically saying that that money doesn't exist. It never existed. Bondholders are pursuing this $3.7 billion in cash. There's a 6-month extension on the negotiation. It's the 12th extension request since the mediation team was appointed in April of 2022. So I, call me a skeptic that by the end of this 6 month period we will have a conclusive result. What are your impressions on that process? And the floor is yours to respond to what Tom was talking about as well, which is some of these things would happen independent of the PREPA bankruptcy, but it certainly doesn't help.
Yeah, I think the problem has always been planning here in Puerto Rico, and that's something that we've seen with every aspect, not even in the energy sector. Um, when the big push for renewable energy was in, I think it was 2014 or 2012, I think under Fortuño, under Governor Fortuño, it
Yeah.
was like, let's get renewables, and nobody was thinking about how the grid was gonna sustain that, the generation, the old legacy assets from PREPA, if they would withstand those variations in frequency and all of that. Batteries was not a requirement for these
No.
projects. So as Tom says, now we have 1,000 megawatts of renewable energy that sometimes they help us during the morning, but then they're gone, and then the legacy assets are basically struggling to keep up. So that's one only example of how poor planning has impacted. I think for the talking about the Luma contract, I think the problem has always been, like you said, Sam, they're not perfect. Nobody's saying that Luma has made this they're the perfect operator, but I think the lack of oversight from PREPA, from the P3, has been non-existent. That has affected that we are on top of what's going on with Luma, or making Luma accountable for what they have to perform, how they have to perform. Now that the Energy SAR is also the head of the P3, and has a vast experience in the electric, the energy sector in Puerto Rico, which his predecessors did not have. They were not energy people. They didn't understand. So hopefully, or at least me being hopeful, is that with that knowledge, that path can be clearer, and there can be some better oversight. Of course, we all know that, at least to the public or to they're like, no, we not hate Luma, but we don't want Luma here. We want somebody else or whatever. But for me, it's like you're just gonna take us back again, and we're gonna have to go through the same thing again. Because something that I think people forget is that Luma is here because the federal government said that to administer the funds, you needed a separate entity from the government of Puerto Rico. So we had no choice. We had to do that because Puerto Rico needs still those funds. So that's something that I think it's important. Another thing that we're seeing is these projects, private investors that want to come to Puerto Rico, develop these projects. With the bankruptcy, they feel like, oh my God, there's some uneasiness with just coming into Puerto Rico and investing on these projects. Obviously, we have the reassurance for the rate, the PREPA rate accounts. There's a rider specifically for the purchase of power. So that is kind of like a sure thing that you're going to get paid by generating power and providing it to the grid. And PREPA in its all his history has never defaulted on a payment to a independent power producer. So there is that history. And that's basically the only way the government can bring reassurance to these private investors to come here and develop these projects.
Yeah.
So
small victories.
I just wanted to mention that. With regards to the bondholders' allegations and all of this, I mean, the records are there. PREPA has to file all of their revenue, all of their financials. The PREB has to review all of that for every rate case that they review. for the modifications of the rates. So I don't know if that's something that's true or not. I don't know if that allegation is true or not. For the extension of the 6 more months, I mean, it's just everybody's a little bit skeptical because you're saying, oh, these contractors come in. They're saying that these consultants, oh, we need 6 more months. But we have been in this for so long that it's, how do you need more 6 months? You just more money going to these consultants, and we don't even have a final decision made. So
yeah, I think it was PJ Wilson from SESA who had a great line on LinkedIn. It's like, why not 180-month extension?
yeah,
You guys are getting paid $1 million a month. Why
yeah,
Yeah.
why stop at 6? And I think
yeah.
that's sort of the point that you're making. It's like,
Well,
who wins out of all of this? Well, they certainly are not coming out worse off, right?
Exactly. And that's why there has to be a line. There has to be a line that has to be drawn by the government with that regards. And obviously the bankruptcy court, but they're just gonna go with the back and forth. So I don't know how that's gonna play out, but with the history that
everybody, and I mean everybody involved, from the bondholders, from, the government, from to Judge Swain, they do not want to have an imposed judgment, right? These are not the way these things get done,
Mhm.
where they stick, right? And if you have the imposed judgment, whoever like really doesn't like it, and it could be everybody who really doesn't like it, they're going to be appealing the ruling up. But it does get you to a glide path toward finality. And everybody's afraid about what that solution might be. And so it's so much easier for all of them to just grant another 6 months. And yet the people who kind of lose in that is really Puerto Rico, right? The people
Yeah,
of Puerto Rico, the government of Puerto Rico, the energy system,
yeah.
lacking that, that certainty, the longer it goes on. And frankly, it would be much better. It won't happen, but if they just said, okay, well, you can try and break the whole thing up. And it's like, because then you're dumping the problem on the creditors, right? The creditors have got to come in and sort it out. They've got to provide new money. They've got to make sure that the system prices might go up a little, but they can't go up a lot. But at least the money would be flowing in. You'd be able to have money to start using the FEMA funds and other amounts there to actually fix the grid and
Hmm.
stabilize the system. So, pensioners might get screwed. Other people, these are bad things that nobody wants to take the risk that they're going to happen. But you would begin to start fixing the problems on the ground.
So
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
we're coming up on our hour. I have one other area of conversation I want to cover with you, Eidalia, which is the role of industrial users in the whole system. And I mentioned this story at our event, our segment last week at the Puerto Rico Energy in 60 Minutes conversation. I participated in a panel at Power Up Puerto Rico earlier this month about community resiliency, and I suggested that there really isn't much way of community resiliency in Puerto Rico. Now, there are case studies here and there um, of success, but
Hmm.
ultimately, what I see is bottlenecks at the top are creating individuals, whether it's residences or industry, to pursue their own solutions. And that creates a bit of a vicious cycle, making it harder for the macro challenges to be solved, not least of which is the individual solution represents a defector from the grid, which reduces net revenues for the operator or for the utility, which makes it harder to pay bondholders back, which prolongs the bankruptcy, which et cetera, makes it harder to procure competitive participants in the grid. So
In the short term,
in the short
it's the
term,
it's the
right?
classic J curve. Yeah,
It's a classic J curve,
yeah.
and it sort of puts us on to go back to Braulio's comment in the chat, at least at the very moment, an uncertain pathway forward for the energy sector. So, what is the appropriate role of the industrial manufacturing tech sector? Is it on one hand perfectly rational and appropriate that they're pursuing the solutions they need to be successful, or should there be higher costs to do that because it makes the rest of the macro solutions harder to implement?
I mean, that's a complicated scenario because obviously the manufacturing industry, they want to have a reliable source of power. And if they can't get it from the grid, they're going to get it from their own power generation. So that's why we've seen so many CHP systems come up in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Also renewables for utility scale and even rooftops. There's discussion that Rico there's a project with Ricos to install solar panels in all their facilities to provide their tenants with reliable energy. So as you can
Not
see,
just solar panels either, right? I mean,
yeah,
we're talking, in some cases, we're talking about proper microgrids. Yeah.
exactly. So those are great initiatives for the manufacturing industry, and they're going for it, and they're not gonna stop on that.
No.
And wait for the government to stabilize their generation assets and their T&D system. So,
Well, there's and it's going to drive economic activity. It's going to drive investment. It's going to drive tax revenue, right? So, the proper argument, or a proper policy argument is don't stop that. That's working, right? That's creating economic development. It's creating jobs. It's creating growth. It's creating room to move. But let's recognize that allowing this to go forward does have an impact on the certainty and the viability and the economics of the energy system as it currently stands. And so maybe what you need to do is to encourage that, go forward, but think about at the government level, carving out a certain amount of tax revenues to be put back into the energy system, in that way, because it's good for everybody, but it's bad in this sector. Let's make sure that we're doing it without taxing each individual microgrid and or making it harder for them to do it. Find it's okay when you've got success, you can actually recognize that tax revenues are higher, or you assume they will be, and that we're going to commit to put a little bit back in for a number of years into the energy side, just so you can recognize and have a little bit more certainty with revenues. So there are solutions. They're not necessarily easy solutions to argue, because how do you determine how much additional revenue is actually generated by having this? So you can hire somebody. The best thing to do is say, what can we afford? What can we allocate? Even if it's a little bit to make people feel better about doing deals to allow the investment that's happening to continue to happen, and not have it hold up, say, a resolution on the bankruptcy, which is what people have been arguing for years.
Yeah, and I mean, with the executive order on inshoring, that's a focus on bringing manufacturing to Puerto Rico, and that's part of those initiatives that they're trying to impose. I saw Braulio's comment on Rico being hard to deal with. Rico, yeah, we have clients that they're trying. They didn't even have an agreement, like what Tom was saying, like a model sample template for having solar in their roofs. So having to deal with that on our side as attorneys, trying to get that agreement drafted so that they can duplicate this in other sites, it has been difficult, but hopefully with the new director of Rico, which came from the Manufacturing Association, he was the president for many years. Hopefully that will help streamlining that and getting those projects really completed.
Yep.
Eidalia, last question from my end, and thinking forward, what's next for the Puerto Rico energy sector?
Well, we were in a meeting with the PREB recently, and the president of the PREB said something that was very interesting to me, and he said, "Look, in 6 to 7 years, if everything aligns as we want with the 3000 RFP, an adhesive plant, the Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 renewable projects in place, if all of this aligns, in 6 to 7 years, we'll be good in generation. Then we have to focus on the T&D."
Then we have to focus on.
Then we have to focus on the T&D,
because that's what they're saying, right? For me, I think that, and that's been something that I've always seen. Everybody tries to say, "Look, let's do this first, and then we do this," rather than thinking, let's do both things at the same time.
Right.
And that's something that has been very difficult for the government of Puerto Rico to do. We can have many projects going on, we can have many initiatives going on at the same time, and they're not exclusive to one another. Obviously, we need it to make sense, and that's why
Right.
collaboration between the agencies is the pertinent agencies is so important.
Yeah. You'll never be in 6 or 7 years if to get to the place where we've got enough generation and it can be, moved around the island. You can't actually get there without fixing the grid, right?
Exactly.
It's just it won't work.
Well, even in the
Maybe he misspoke. Maybe not. I don't know, right? But I mean, it just can't happen. You can't get there without at least doing something
yeah,
for the
well, I
grid.
mean,
Yeah,
they're taking into account that there has been things being done right now.
right,
Luma is not doing anything. There's
right.
substations that are being worked on. There are lines that are being worked on. So they're thinking on
Yep.
that. But I think they're thinking more of like an overhaul, like a total overhaul of the TND. Because right now we're just fixing what we think is needs to be fixed. The FEMA funds are for not for new things, are more for, oh, this got damaged, let's repair it. So I think
Well,
that's what his
they are, but what is it? It was section 407 or 704 or whatever that they elected to choose to allow them not to replace the same things, to allow them to do that. It can't be any more than the cost. So, I mean,
yeah,
when they're doing it, when they're obviously like the little repairs of things that are falling apart, the band-aids and baling wire, that is happening. But that's
yeah,
happening because, there's no money to do anything else and there's not enough
yeah,
working capital. So the bankruptcy, but we talk about the bankruptcy all the time. If you can straighten it out, the things that you're doing to upgrade the grid as you're bringing more power on are actually solving some of those problems. You're not necessarily going to get to maybe what he's referring to, which was what people are talking about, the highly resistant grid, where you're breaking it into a lot of different autonomous zones effectively that could have enough generation to be up and operating even if some of the rest of it went down.
yeah,
That what these investments that they're doing and planning in upgrading different systems to bring more on the grid are with an eye toward that. Already, where they're positioning some of the best assets and things in the plan are also with an eye toward that. But yeah, until you're not going to get to the point where you can just say, oh, okay, well, we're going to put a new breaker in here, here, and here, and isolate this. That they're not going to do until
yeah.
everything is stable. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what they were discussing. And even in the IRP, just to finalize, I know we're out of time, but Luma says there needs additional transmission capacity that is going to be needed. And they even mentioned for Carolina to San Juan, Ponce ES to Bayamon, Ponce
Yeah,
OE to Arecibo, and San Juan to Bayamon links to support the portfolio that they say is the preferred scenario. So
that's
this
right.
goes hand in hand. Obviously, the IRP does not go into TND because their focus is a resource plan. It's more generation focused, but it's something that's very important.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we will leave it there for today. Eidalia, thank you so much for joining the Puerto Rico Energy Forum and for your insights today. I've put your LinkedIn in the chat. I encourage everybody to follow your posts because really the insights that you provide on LinkedIn and elsewhere are really quite valuable and digestible. So if you're interested in hearing more from Eidalia, take a look at her LinkedIn page. Otherwise, Eidalia, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you again for being a part of the Puerto Rico Energy Forum.
Thank you. It was a great conversation, and hopefully this we'll be able to have a energy forum where we'll say, look, all of these amazing things
Yeah.
are happening, and Puerto Rico is is already reached its goal. That's my dream at least. So hopefully
Yeah.
everybody else's dream
Cool.
is the same.
Everybody can put your energy sector champagne bottle off to the side, and we'll pop them together when we
Yeah.
have big milestones. But
Yes.
absolutely.
Well,
All
thank you
right,
very
talk
much.
to you soon.
Thanks, Eidalia.